Hello, so in this video I am going to talk about Asperger's and the stereotype that people with Asperger's and other forms of autism are socially aloof and in their own world. I am very socially interested, and I've always been very socially interested all through my life. As a young child and right up to the present day. So I do not conform to the stereotype of a socially aloof autistic person. In actual fact, so being socially obsessed is something that I've always been. I've always been very aware of other people and interested in other people. I would like to make it clear in this video that social obsession or social interest and social competence exist along different poles. So in other words, someone can be very socially interested while lacking social know-how, because social interest is a personality variable, and autistic people, just like neurotypicals, differ in terms of how extroverted or how introverted they are. And I would say that as an autistic person, I'm relatively extroverted from an autistic perspective, particularly as a child. As a small child, according to my mother, I enjoyed running around other children. I would run around them in circles while giggling. It was a little game I liked to play. I was not in my own world, far from it. I was always very alert, my mother said. But I found it very difficult to connect to other children, and this became more apparent as I grew older. Something that school noted as soon as I started primary school, that I just wasn't interacting with the other children, because while I desperately wanted to relate to other kids, I didn't know how. I just couldn't enter their world. And this meant that for most of my childhood, I didn't have any friends at all. And when I finally did make a friend when I was 9 years old, the friendship, it was highly fickle and broke down frequently. I was friends with a girl in question for a couple of days at a time, and most of the time apart from when I sometimes played with a girl who was 2 years younger than me at primary school, who actually also had Asperger's. She was diagnosed quite late as well. For most of the time, I didn't have anyone to play with, so I was on my own, and I didn't have what you would call a genuine friendship. I never ever went on sleepovers or anything like that. I never had any genuine friendship at all, which became more obvious when I was a teenager, when I became very socially isolated. But I did crave friendship, certainly as a small child, before I became rather disillusioned by the whole thing. The disillusionment set in as a teenager, and after repeated social failures, I sort of gave up, and I started thinking, I'm not really that fussed about this whole friendship thing, because it just hadn't worked out for me, and I didn't have any good experiences with it, so I kind of gave up trying. But initially, I tried my hardest. Making friends became a sort of project of mine. Every time we went on holiday, for example, we went on holiday to Devon and Stratford-upon-Avon every summer as a child, so a regular holiday, which helped me because I am a creature of habit and I like routine. But every year we went to the same place, and I looked forward to it. And one of the reasons why I looked forward to it was because it was an opportunity to try and make friends. I always made a beeline for the swings when we were on holiday, and I would approach other girls on the swings and ask them if they would like to be my friend. I can remember one little girl very clearly. I can't remember her name, but I do remember what she looked like. and she was a redhead, and she would have been about 4 or 5 years old. And I approached her on the swings, I was about 8, and I said, "Hello, what's your name?" I always began by saying that. And the girl didn't respond. I didn't give up though, I just persisted. "Hello, what's your name?" I said again, and again she didn't respond. This went on for some time. Eventually I broke through her barrier. She was quite a shy little girl, and eventually she told me her name. I think she was called Rosie, but I can't remember. I then asked her how old she was and where she lived, and I asked her quite a few questions. And finally I said, "Would you like to be my friend? Would you like to play with me?" She was like, "Yes." And I remember we played together for a little while, and she invited me to her tent. But this was only, as I say, one day for for an hour or two, and I didn't see her again. There are other examples of this. I'd always approach other kids and ask them if they'd like to be my friend, and I was very excited when they said yes. And this was something I looked forward to. And also when I was on the train while we were travelling there, I wouldn't hesitate to approach other children on the train and try and talk to them. Very socially interested. I also played with dolls. I had a collection of dolls as a child. My favourite doll was called Sarah, and she came everywhere with me, and I invented stories about Sarah's life, what she had to eat and what she did at school. I also I had a particular interest in girls with long golden hair, a bit like Rapunzel. I fantasised that I myself had long golden hair. I'm not sure what I was drawn to, but I enjoyed watching the hair swishing across a girl's back, looking at the feathery bits of hair and the way it swished across the girl's back, leaving fine little hairs in its wake. There's something enchanting about that. And I really wanted to have long golden hair. I loved Barbie dolls. I loved brushing their hair. And I loved fairy tales. I had a huge collection of Ladybird fairy tale books. Another thing I liked doing as a child was, I remember doing this when we were on holiday, was I used to collect leaflets, leaf through the leaflets, and cut out pictures of girls, stick the pictures on a bit of paper, and then write a story in diary form, an imaginary story about that girl's life at school, what she had to eat, right from breakfast all the way through the day, and also what her family looked like and things like that. So I might cut out pictures of her parents and her siblings. I enjoyed reading fiction about girls at school, so I really enjoyed the Mallory Towers books and What Katie Did Next. I was interested in women in history. I had a book actually about famous women in history. I had a particular preoccupation with girls and women. And I just really wanted to fit in. And I often copied girls at school. There was one example when a girl at school, she came into school one day with a clipboard and a bit of paper and a pen. And she sat down, this was at lunchtime, she sat down on a bench, and drew a picture. And a teacher approached her and praised her. And I was sitting on my own because I spent a lot of time on my own at primary school. It was rare, for me to have someone to play with. Most of the time I was on my own. So I was watching this on my own. And I thought, maybe I should do that. So the next day, I came to school with a clipboard, a pen and a bit of paper. And I started to draw. And again, I'm not too sure why I did this, but I've always had this problem with identity and really knowing who I am. And wanting to be someone that I'm not. I've never really been comfortable with myself. I've always fantasised about being someone that I'm not. Trying things out, watching other people, observing. I've done this all through my life. Acting a part. And I really, literally have no clue about who I am because I'm always acting. It's just something I do. I've never really known who I am. I've always been living in a sort of fantasy world, really, about who I am. So again, that's another example of me copying and being interested in other girls. I also memorised what kids at school, boys and girls, had to eat in their lunchbox, because food was a particular obsession of mine. So I memorised for lunch what every single child in my class at school had to eat for lunch. I enjoyed playing with plastic food and things like that. Dolls, Barbies, as I've already mentioned. And then as a teenager, I became really very obsessed with the actress Kate Winslet, and consequently with babies when the actress Kate Winslet had a baby. The Winslet obsession, I will talk about the Winslet obsession a bit more in another video because it really requires a whole video of its own, really, as it's such a broad, it will involve quite, it's a big area, and I like to do it justice, so I could talk about that obsession in another video. This video is just really about highlighting my social obsessions. But yeah, when Winslet had a baby, I became very, very interested in babies, and I read parenting magazines. It was at this point in my life that I became particularly socially isolated. I tried to make friends when I started secondary school because I was desperate to make friends, and I actually thought secondary school would be a fresh new start for me. Like a phoenix rising from the ashes, I could build myself anew, make lots of friends, and no one would know about my past. But sadly, that wasn't to be. But one girl told me I was too clingy, that I followed her around too much, because I just didn't have any understanding of personal space. So even when she went into the toilets, for example, I'd follow her. Another girl told me that I didn't speak enough. I didn't know how to maintain conversations and do the whole small talk thing. So I became very, very socially isolated. And it was at this point in my life that the Kate Winslet obsession took off, and that was the biggest obsession I've ever had in my whole life. I mean, I've always been very obsessed with things, and intense interests have been something I've always had. I get very, very intense, very obsessed with things very easily. I'm not without obsessions for long. But the Kate Winslet obsession was the biggest one, the most all-encompassing, and as I say, it was an extreme obsession. Really, really, very, very extreme. It meant the life to me. It seemed to occupy a space in my life at a time when I became very, very socially isolated, and it was at this point in time I stopped caring about making friends. I tried, and it hadn't worked. And I think that put me off because of my bad experiences making friends. It kind of put me off trying, which is a shame, really. That social interest, that initial social interest I had as a child, kind of disappeared in a way. I was still socially obsessed with Kate Winslet, but in terms of other people, I just didn't care so much anymore, apart from babies. Babies and small children, because of Kate Winslet. It became an obsession. And I volunteered at a nursery school, which I'll talk about in another video. It was, however, as a teen that I started to become more aware of appropriate behaviour. Because although I was socially interested as a child, I was also very socially inappropriate in my behaviour because I didn't have any understanding about what was appropriate and what was not. And moreover, I also didn't really have any empathy. That's not to say I was a heartless child. I have been told, I could be very caring and things. Certainly towards my brother, I was very protective. My younger brother, I always looked out for him and looked after him. So I wasn't, I don't want to make it out as though I was some horrible child or anything like that, although certainly as a teenager I used to think I was that horrible child because I didn't understand the reasons for my problems with empathy. I realised as a teenager it became more obvious to me that I struggled with empathy, and obviously as a child I didn't know anything about empathy, but as a teenager I started to realise that I lacked this thing called empathy, whatever empathy is. I just became aware that I had difficulties with it as I started to understand a bit more about the world and my deficiencies, and it bothered me. I really, really worried, I might have some personality disorder, or, was there some horrible person, some cold-hearted person. It really did bother me. But at this age, as a child, certainly as a child, I just didn't understand other people had feelings. The whole notion of feelings, it didn't occur to me. So I could be quite, children, I often treated children a bit like toys. So I might go up to them, tap them on their back, pinch them, push them, and find it funny because I just did not understand that that other kids had feelings. Literally, they were like toys. They made me laugh. Again, that was my attempt of interacting, but in a very inappropriate way. And even as a teenager, as a young teenager, I would do very inappropriate things.